Thank you, Lynn, and thank you all of you for being with us here in person and online. I think we're going to have an interesting discussion today about one of the great pre-Confederation artists of Canada and his relationship with the Jewish community and his relationship with the city of Montreal. We have two experts with us to help us guide us through the conversation. The first is Pierre-Olivier Ouellet, who is the author of the book, The Incredible Story of William Raphael. He's a professor as well as an art historian and author. The other guest is Clarence Epstein, a man who wears many hats, but today he's here as an artist.
No kippah.
No kippah? He wouldn't have been in the pictures then with from Mr. Raphael, as you will soon see. But Clarence is an art historian who is really an expert on the art history of Montreal during this period. So we're going to have a conversation, the three of us, and hope to cover a real wide range of topics. I'm going to start with you, Pierre-Olivier. My understanding is that William Raphael arrived in Montreal in about 1857, and that he had already changed his name from Israel Rafalski to William Raphael, which showed a bit of chutzpah in that Raphael was, of course, one of the greatest painters of the Renaissance. Can you tell us why he had such self-confidence and give us a bit of background on William Raphael?
Yes, of course. So I'll give you a little bit of background. William Raphael was born in the town of Nakel. Is it all right like this? Oh, louder. Okay. So I will adjust. Well, he was raised in an Orthodox Jewish family with several children. And at very young age, he learned three languages, Hebrew, Yiddish, and also German. And in short, just like me, English was not his mother tongue. So, well, you will excuse me if I sometimes I stumble. But anyway, so as I said, William Raphael was raised in an Orthodox Jewish family. But during Raphael's youth, the region where he lived in Eastern Europe was an important center for the Ashkala, or what we call the Jewish Enlightenment. And it was a movement that encouraged the modernization of Jewish communities through exposure to more secular education and also culture. And William Raphael, as a matter of fact, even if he came from a relatively modest background, he had the occasion to take music lessons. He learned to play violin. He read also romantic poetry and learned about ancient history. And as a teenager, he also began drawing and taking notes in his sketchbooks, and I bet he kept up throughout his life. And a very, very important step was taken by Raphael on August 1851, when he decided to leave his family home to pursue formal artistic training. At this occasion, he went to Berlin and he attended to the Royal Prussian Academy of Art. And as part of his academic training, he was exposed to two great models prevalent in art schools of the 19th century, that is to say, the antiquity and also the nature. And he drew he made many drawings from live models as well as antique figures. And as you can see here, he also made sketches that were focused on human anatomy. And we must say that at that time, it was part of his studying to go to the to see some cadavers and to draw from them under, of course, the guidance of their teacher. What is less known is that these skills would serve Raphael well, because years after his arrival in Montreal in 1857, he created anatomical images for the famous Dr. William Osler, a Canadian physician, which is frequently described as one of the father of modern medicine. And some of the drawings made by Raphael were also published in Dr. Osler's book in 1880.
Thank you, Pierre-Olivier. Clarence, he arrives here in Montreal in 1857. What kind of city was Montreal at that time? What happened when he arrived in the port of Montreal?
So the 1850s Montreal was coined the city of wealth and the city of death. It was a place where there were contrasts. These contrasts are not unfamiliar to us today because we still see the intersections of communities, the intersections of challenges in a city that was growing by leaps and bounds. From the 1830s through the 1850s, there was a mass immigration, primarily of British subjects that were coming into the city and changing the composition of what was generally a French-Canadian town in the 1760s and really becoming a metropolis. In fact, sometime around in the 1850s and to the early 1860s, the city was officially coined a metropolis by the British Empire. And so with that came enormous challenges. There was, of course, considerable illnesses, and we know about those illnesses and the people that came through that became terribly sick, that were inevitably cared for by the clergy, and so the clergy had an important role in the city. But of course, the British population started building their own institutions, and by the 1850s, what was all the more interesting was how artists started capturing those moments in Montreal life. So in the 1840s and 1847 specifically, the Houses of Parliament burnt. And at the same time that these buildings started catching fire, it was a sense also that the city was growing by leaps and bounds. These buildings, some of them were kind of built in older traditions. New building codes were introduced. And so artists were starting to capture the evolution of the city. And these artists not only captured buildings, but they captured moments. Some of the great moments were the wealth that was coming into the city. The Bank of Montreal, which you see on the right of your screen, painted by Cornelius Krieghoff. We know Krieghoff as an artist who was painting the habitants of Quebec, but we should also recognize that artists were trying to capture the city in all its various evolutions. And to the left, you have the burning not of the Parliament's building, but of the property of a Jewish man named Moses Judah Hayes, who was invariably the impresario of the city at the time. This building, which in fact was called one of the earliest shopping centers in the city, had entertainment facilities and eventually housed the Parliament after the fire of 1847. And so there was an intersection of artists, and this artist, James Duncan, who painted the burning of the Hayes House, was, like Raphael, a very important figure that we lost track of for many decades, and only recently, through the work of the McCord, we understand the impact that James Duncan had on chronicling the city, much in the same way that we now understand the way that William Raphael had in documenting the city and the people of the province of Quebec. In the next slide, you see an example of two of those comparisons of the same place painted by two different artists with different impressions and different styles, but very much capturing the city at the time. The work on the left, again by James Duncan, is of the Gavazzi riots. So as we were discussing, the city was still a place with great rays of political tension. So much in the same way that the Houses of Parliament were burnt to the ground because there were people upset about the Rebellion Losses Bill, the bill that recognized the fact that French Canadians had right for compensation after their rebellions in the 1830s. That happened again in the 1850s with a Gavazzi riot, wherein an Italian monk came to the city and generated conflict between the Protestants and the Catholics over his views of what the Catholic Church was doing that the Protestants were highly upset about. And so this view of Beaver Hall Hill that James Duncan renders is very distinct from the view of Beaver Hall Hill that William Raphael presents. This Haymarket Square, at a time where obviously we see not conflict, but we see commerce, and we see the various buildings that the religious elite were constructing in what was then considered an optimal neighborhood that was bridging the old town and the new town. And what we see through the work of Raphael in this gesture, in this important gesture, is he's now using photographic references from the other great artist at the time, William Notman, in bringing together the actual landscape of the city and the artist's impression of that landscape through his eye.
Well, it seems that Montreal comes to its religious strife honestly. Some things never change. Pierre-Olivier, you write about how Raphael first makes his mark as an artist by catching the attention of William Notman, who everyone knows is one of the great photographers of the period. Notman hires him in his studio to do color photographs. Pretty soon, Raphael, I gather, is a celebrated portrait photographer in the city, creating portraits like this one. But he really comes into his own when he begins to create genre scenes. Can you tell us a bit about his genre scenes?
Yes, of course. So we have probably a painting, yes, just over there. So he began his artwork, his career in Montreal, and he was associated, as you said, with Notman's studio. So we had to make some painting on photographs and based on photographic enlargements, but it was not his ambitions. So William Raphael just wanted to do some genre scenes. And he had the occasion to paint this one that we see here, the Old Peddler, that was shown in Montreal in September 1859, on display in a boutique of the bookseller Dawson and Son. And the painting was seen by one journalist of the newspaper, the Montreal Herald, that published some very positive lines about the subject of this painting. So as we can see with this painting, we are discovering William Raphael, which is working in an art style that we can call the Biedermeier style. The Biedermeier style is an artistic movement that was prominent in Central Europe in the second quarter of the 19th century, and that seems to have colored the artistic vision of Raphael during his formative years in Berlin. With its emphasis on realism, we can see that in the Old Peddler, there is a way that is aimed to present subjects from everyday life. In a meticulous composition, the artist depicts people and all the objects as realistically as possible. So this is the kind of art that we can see in this Biedermeier style. And over the years, Raphael continued his personal work, focusing on genre scenes depicting the Canadian people and landscape. So if we change thank you. So if we look at this painting entitled Tandem, Raphael shows interest in themes that had been scarcely explored at the time. We can see that the children, no doubt pleased with the speed of their sled, make funny faces. The one on the left even smiles broadly as he shows the young driver how to steer, how to control the steering. So these children have managed to turn a winter chore, which is fetching firewood, into a game. Of course, Raphael's art is not essentially humorous. That said, like these smiling characters in Tandem, he occasionally liked to incorporate cheerful elements, revealing aspects of his own temperament. And if we look at the other painting there, the Habitant, It's another, so we have two of them, but this is the kind of typical composition made by the artist at that time between 1872 and 1910. He always put a figure that is depicted in a closed, windowless room, alone, and also near a stove. Is dressed in traditional winter garb. We can see that he has a hood, sorry, a hood fastened with a long red sash, a blue toque, and moccasin. The man is seated in a simple wooden chair. And what we can see with that is that Raphael presents the habitant not as a caricature, as sometimes did the painter Cornelius Grégoff the years before, but he paints the habitant as a quietly dignified individual. And through his work, Raphael contributes to a richer visual representation of the Canadian countryside and its people. So, yeah.
So he depicts Quebec culture and Quebec scenes, but he's also a proud member of the Jewish community. And as we see, he was really the first Jewish artist in Montreal. And I'd like you, Clarence, to talk a bit about what the Jewish community was like at that time and his depictions of the community.
So the Jews arrived at the same time as the British did in Montreal in the 1770s. Not unlike a lot of the military campaigns that the British ran through North America, the Jewish businesses followed because these were economies that they could support, and they were mobile, and they settled in those places where the British garrisons were erected. And so in the 1770s, the first Jewish synagogue was established in Montreal. It was a synagogue of Sephardic congregants. They were Spanish and Portuguese that came through the Dutch and British traditions, and they were in effect the elite of the Jewish community in the city for the first 75 years when the British arrived here. And their institutions started taking shape. We don't know as much about the early buildings in the 1770s, but by the 1830s, we start seeing an important development in that community, wherein they are building in areas that are prominent in the city. They are supporting not only their own fundraising campaigns, but the campaigns of both the Catholics and the Protestants, because they also are trying to ingratiate and connect themselves as a community that otherwise would have been ostracized for not being Christians. And when they build that first synagogue in the 1830s, we see a marked development in their relationship with the Protestants and with the Catholics. Primarily with the Protestants, where obviously the lingua franca of English is the dominant business language. And so where you see here this lithograph by, this engraving by James Duncan again, who was the preeminent chronicler of what was called the Hochelaga Depicta, an important story of Montreal's growth in the 1830s. An Egyptian-style building, different from what the Christians would have built because they were looking at European traditions and the Jews wanted to differentiate themselves, was built with the support of a number of Jewish families that at the time had become successful, like Moses Judah Hayes, very much an important player in the community, and one that we don't even recognize today as much for his Jewish contributions as for his civic contributions, because after the Jewish Emancipation Act in the 1830s, Moses Judah Hayes was appointed the first Jewish police officer in Quebec. And this is a very important recognition of the toleration of the British towards the Jews. So by the time Raphael comes to Montreal, he is now incorporated in a community that is tolerated a little bit more, that is growing and is represented. About 500 Jews are in Montreal in the 1850s. Doesn't sound like an important number, but we know that this number multiplies later in the century. But these 500 Jews are the kind of community that Raphael enters. And of course, we know about his relationship with the Danziger family, who is the family that he marries into. But the Danziger family, also being Germans, connect to a German-speaking population that Raphael is more comfortable with, as well as the Jewish population. So he is both German and Jewish. He associates with the Germans in the community, which are a much smaller community of Lutherans in the city. And he associates obviously with the Jews where he's most comfortable, marries into the Danziger family, the Danziger family being members of the only synagogue at the time, because the newest German and Polish synagogue only gets founded in the 1850s, very small congregation. So who does Raphael meet? He meets the rabbi of the synagogue, the De Sola, Abraham De Sola family. And through the De Solas and their connections within the city, this is where Raphael begins getting his commissions and his introductions into society. Because not only is Rabbi De Sola the head of the Jewish synagogue in Montreal, he is also a professor at McGill. And because of his academic interests and his rabbinical interest, he has great credibility in the city and has contacts that not many other Jews, except for Moses Judah Hayes and perhaps a couple of other families like the Hart family, have in the city. So Raphael connects into that community. We see a portrait of an Orthodox Jew that he presents in the 1860s. But if we move forward, we can see that he is also trying to represent both his cultural identity and the demand and interest for certain scenes in the collector market that he is part of in the 1860s and 1870s, and all the way through to the end of his life. He is kind of combining his own experiences with the general experience of living life in Quebec, in the countryside, having urban experiences much in the same way that many other Montrealers do. And when he paints this scene, what is unusual yet is unremarkable unless you pay close attention is that the male sitter is wearing a kippah. And we won't notice that so obviously, and neither would any potential collector looking at this painting, but he is kind of documenting his own life and his own moments in Montreal, but at the same time introducing that to a population that would have otherwise seen this as just a couple enjoying a lovely day on the current.
Thank you for that, and the real explanation of the roots of the Jewish community, which I think is interesting for all of us. Pierre-Olivier, he's probably best known for his paintings of Bon Secours Market, two of which you see you don't see, you see here, one of them. And we'll see others as we go through the presentation. But he was quite a celebrated artist at the time, and was, despite not being that well known to us in the audience today, he was really quite well known then. And can you tell us a bit about the accolades that he received during his lifetime?
Yes, of course. So it's well known that these two paintings that we have here are the main paintings that were put into the art books about Canadian art. These are the two main paintings that we see usually about William Raphael. But as you said, William Raphael was very involved in his time in the community, and he played a major role in the development of the art, but also the art education in Montreal and in Canada. And let's just recall that for a long time, Montreal lacked both a permanent art museum and also a formal art school. And to address this gap, we have members of the city's intellectual and also financial elite that proposed the creation of the Art Association of Montreal, which is known now as the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts. And you talked about some contact. He connected, of course, with German people, with the Jewish community, but also In the English community, you have William Nutman, which is Scottish. So he had this great link with William Nutman, which was a member of this Art Association of Montreal. And as a founding member, William Raphael played an active role in the Art Association of Montreal and all its activities. So he participated regularly to its exhibitions, and also it was inside within the Art Association of Montreal that one of the Raphael's artwork achieved its first major success, because one of his creation, which was Bon Secours Market, which we don't know now because it has been lost, but maybe you have it at your home, you can look for that. But yeah, that painting was exhibited in 1864, and it brought him significant acclaim that was echoed in the newspapers. And in the eyes of the connoisseurs and also the critics, Raphael had produced an exceptional and ambitious work of art depicting urban life. And continuing along this creative trajectory, 2 years later, in 1866, he painted this remarkable work behind Bon Secours Market, his most famous composition. This piece still reflects the spirits of the Biedermeier spirit style that I talked earlier, and with its emphasis on realism and a detailed portrayal of everyday life activity. So we can see it's a very lively scene with people that converse while a fiddler plays his instrument. So he played a major role in the Art Association of Montreal, but also he played a role in the inauguration of the Canadian Academy of Art a few years later, on March 1880. So he became one of the few founding members, academicians. And his large composition that we see here, that is Indian encampment in the lower St. Lawrence estuary on the right. This painting was accepted as a reception piece, consolidating his status as an academician in 1880. And we must say that it was just a few people that were named academician at that time. So we can understand that William Raphael became such a great artist that was very researched for his artwork. And also we can see that with this painting, that he painted the landscape of the Charlevoix region, showing the impressive Cap Blanc cliff on Murray Bay, what we call now La Malbaie, as well as the St. Lawrence River and an indigenous people's camp, all under a moonlit sky. And it's a fine demonstration that he made of understanding the various light sources. As we can see, there is this silvery light from the moon that reached the waves below. There is also a fire in one of the teepees, or the beam that comes from the lighthouse that shines out through the sea. So as the painting behind Bon Secours Market, it became one of his most famous artworks of the time. So he had those success, and also what is very important to say is that at the same time, in 1880, he became the first teacher, art teacher at the Art Association of Montreal, and he had to give course on figure painting and drawing. So you can see that his recognition was full at the time, at the beginning of the early 1880s. And he was clearly a well-regarded artist whose work were collected and was widely seen as one of the leading figures in Canadian painting of the time.
So Clarence, he was one of the leading painters of his time. We're gathered here today, and I would bet that most people in this room, other than two collectors, have no idea who William Raphael was. Is there a reason that he faded out of our collective memory?
So I guess there are theories and there are kind of complexities, and together maybe we can understand better why he faded away. As I was discussing earlier, the city was a divided city. It was half Catholic, half Protestant, with a smattering of other minorities coming in. Those impressions of Jewish people in each of those communities, I think, had impacts on the way Jews operated in the city. If you were part of the Catholic community, in all likelihood, you were limited in your education because the clergy wanted to control that population and didn't encourage education. And so the story of the Jew as the Christ killer was something that was preponderant in that community. And in many ways, the Jews in the city did not socialize or integrate very much with French Canadians. And so there was already a divide there that was not necessarily bridgeable because the church was between the population and the small Jewish community. The British were different. They tolerated Jews. For centuries, they had been tolerating Jews, but toleration doesn't mean that they were fully integrated or accepted. And that reflected in many ways how even the elite Jewish community felt, knowing that they were never going to be fully accepted as part of the elite the way the rest of the Scottish and the Irish and the English population that came in to develop the city were to be. And so I can use even as an example the brother-in-law of Abraham de Sola, Dr. Aaron Hart David, that we recently, the portrait of which we rediscovered thanks to Louis Dobrin, identifying that the Shar Shemayim has his portrait. And we can understand this noble doctor who was third generation by then Canadian, but was not fully accepted within the medical community. And sometime in the 1880s, I believe, he had to leave Montreal because of anti-Semitism and practice medicine in another city. And yet we have an artist like William Raphael, who we haven't heard express in his archives or in any documentation that he was discriminated against, but we understand the movements that were enforced by the 1880s through the literature in Britain and Europe and North America, particularly related to the assassination of the Tsar in Russia, and that assassination created and added foment to the belief that the Jews were behind the conspiracy of his assassination, and it trickled out through various ways in the reporting and in the writings around Jew hating, both in Europe and North America. Raphael finds himself in this milieu where he is a fairly established artist by the 1880s, having been recognized by the Art Association, being part of all the important artist movements and artist associations. But the pushback starts, and we believe that that pushback had a lot to do with the fact that the artists that were coming into their own by the 1880s, 1890s were uncomfortable already with Raphael being part of their scene. He was already a more mature artist, not so interesting to the younger generation of artists who were presenting themselves both as professors and to the trade. And at the same time, Raphael was not necessarily going to push back against that. He had already had a fairly successful career. He had a market. He had demand. But I think that the forces around the artist world, the political world, and the journalistic world around anti-Semitism in the 1880s all created a situation that was not ideal for people like William Raphael.
But Pierre-Olivier, we know him now. And he really has had a rebirth. And can you tell us what we're looking at on the screen now?
Yes, so we can see it's not the painting that I talked about of 1864 that we are still missing, but it's another version of it that was made in 1880. And what we can see here is like a complete reversal of fortune, because for a long time after William Raphael's death, his work was not particularly highlighted in art history publications, nor were his paintings especially collected in museum institutions. That said, the importance of his work could not be always silenced. And what happened here is that one of his significant painting of the Bon Secours market, created in 1880, was put into the art market, and it was impossible at that moment to remain indifferent. And as a matter of fact, in 2015, the National Gallery of Canada decided to spend around $500,000 at a Christie's auction in United Kingdom to acquire Raphael's painting of Bon Secours Market, an amount that was about 10 times his highest estimate of $66,000. And regarding the acquisition, the then director of the National Gallery of Canada, Marc Meyer, stated, and I quote, "The acquisition of this exquisite painting is particularly noteworthy in that it perpetuates an important historical work of art to Canada. Its purchase further enhances our extensive holdings of works of art for the benefit of all Canadians," end of the quote. So this exceptional painting, its sale in 2015, the bidding war also its sparked, and its acquisition by the National Gallery of Canada brought William Raphael back into the spotlight, and and reaffirmed its significance, the significance of his work in the history of Canadian art. And in this artwork, as you can see, William Raphael captures a moment alive with vendors, indigenous people, habitants, children, and rather than celebrating elites, Raphael found dignity into ordinary people, and we can see their gestures, conversations, daily routines, and the result is a collective portrait of Canada in its formative years. You can see people that are hardworking, that are in motion, and through works like this, Raphael shows us how the story of a nation can be traced through its people.
So, Pierre-Olivier, we're coming to the end of our conversation, and I'm going to put on the screen this painting, which is really looking at Montreal from afar. Now in 2026, I'd like you to reflect on looking at William Raphael from afar. And what would you like to comment on?
Yeah, so we look from afar, but not so far from the reality of the book that just has been published, but still, with some distance, I believe that the recognition of William Raphael serves many purposes, because it gives us a chance to revisit his paintings, and there are many of them, and also to make many fascinating discoveries, because with this research, we discovered that he was one of the first Canadian artists to showcase the landscape of Charlevoix, and that years before the widely celebrated artist Clarence Gagnon. Also, as a teacher, he was among the first to give outdoor classes, guiding students along the paths of the Barbizon painters, and also even the Impressionists. At the same time, William Raphael's story prompts reflection about how art history is shaped, and the choice made in highlighting certain artists over others. And beyond that, it raised crucial questions about justice and also inclusions, as Clarence said, with the reality of the anti-Semitism of the time. And it is important to remember that his career was affected by the rise of this anti-Semitic sentiment in the late of the 19th century.
I'd like to add to that, and not everyone in the screen is going to see, but I'm wearing two different shoes today, if you can tell. One is an Adidas, one is a Nike. And it's part of a movement that the foundation that I run has started, called The Power to Act. And The Power to Act, and this representation of these two different companies, is if these two shoes can live in the same box, why can't we all? And this anti-hate movement that we are starting has resonance even for the launching of a book like this in Montreal in this day and age, where we're seeing a lack of tolerance, where we're seeing a lack of recognition of a community that has been here for 250 years, yet for some reason doesn't seem to always resonate in the culture and history of our city today, much as it did 100, 150, 200 years ago. And so the introduction and the reintroduction of an artist, of a Jewish artist, who both contributed to the cultural history of Canada, Quebec, and Montreal in such a formative way, without putting his Jewish identity on his sleeve, but remaining a proud Jew, is very important for our city and for our various communities to recognize, and we should put that forward and use this book really as a calling card to recognize that all our communities are part of the building of Montreal, and that to separate one or to criticize one for a reason that clearly has nothing to do with how our city and our people relate is what I think all of our challenges today, and this book is that calling card for us all in this time.
I may say I completely agree with you. So it was very, very well said. So thank you for this addition.
While I can see from here that he's wearing shoes that match, there is one gentleman who has really devoted his career and his life to building bridges between Montrealers of different backgrounds, both in business and in the community, a proud member of the Jewish community who has stood up for the Jewish community during difficult times, but has always remembered that we're all neighbors and that we have to build strong bridges between all of us. One of the driving forces behind this book is the great-great-grandson. I had to check that. It's younger than I thought, Mr. Wiener. The great-great-grandson of William Raphael. He's also one of the collectors of his paintings, but has really been the driving force behind this book, largely out of pride for his family, but also, as Clarence just said, wanting to send a message of bridge building and living together to the community. So Jonathan is here today, and I'm going to ask him to say a few words.
Twin Jonathans. Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate that introduction. I'm very pleased to be here and very pleased to actually see the final publication. The book was actually put on social media almost a month before the final book turned out. So let me give you, in a capsule, a few important things. I owe a great deal of thanks to Clarence and to Pierre-Olivier. Pierre for writing and faithfully doing the research on the book, and he did it with great passion, dedication, research, and intelligence. It was a great process, and we worked together for a couple of years to put it together, trying to lead him in the right direction to find many of the paintings and material that would help him in his research. A special thanks to Clarence, and he's not alone, but Clarence said to me, because I was dedicated to doing the book, and I didn't know whether I would do it this way or some other way. And given Clarence's history with art and art history, he said to me, let me introduce you to Sarah Angel, the Art Institute of Canada, who will change your ability to disseminate the knowledge on Raphael from 2,000 or 3,000 people to 50,000 or more by having it produced electronically. I was unfamiliar with this. I did a bit of research and found out the magnificent work that she and her organization does to make sure that all Canadians get a chance to be able to share this. And so that's the route we picked. And for many of you here today, if you want to thumb through the book, you can buy a book or you can read it in French or in English on the media. And the link is available. I'm sure we can get that to you. What got me involved in all of this in the first place? We had a few paintings hanging that were habitants that were hanging in my parents' home. I didn't really understand more than it was my great-great-grandfather, or as my grandson says, my great-grandfather to the power of 4. It was, I guess, around my 23rd or 24th birthday, I went to the National Gallery with my aunt and discovered Behind the Bon Secours Market, which I just fell in love with. And the fact that he's painted in the painting and it's part of the composition and the complexity of it. I've held a copy of it, and I'll get to that in a minute, outside my office for the last 50 years. My grandmother was turning 90, and she talked about that painting in the National Gallery in great detail many times. And I was trying to figure out what could I get her for her birthday that would mean anything. And suddenly had a wonderful thought and called the curator of the National Gallery, and I said, would it be possible to get a reproduction of that painting for my grandmother for her 90th birthday with 2 spare copies, one for me, one for my dad? And he took it on, and honestly, he did 2 things. He made my grandmother extremely happy because she displayed it in her den, and I have displayed it, as I said, for the last 50 years. But what it did is it kindled a real interest for me in the Raphael paintings. A tragedy occurred. My grandmother lived on 9 Renfrew, and she had 100 paintings in the basement. Unbeknownst to me, she gave them away. I have spent the last 50 years collecting 165 of William Raphael's works. It's been a fantastic journey. I'm going to tell you about an incredible one, and each one has a story, so they're all very important to me. I'm quickly running out of wall space, and somebody taught me I could use the ceilings. I discovered in my research an atelier in Lachine at a church, I shouldn't say church, a convent called Les Sœurs de Sainte-Anne. And Les Sœurs de Sainte-Anne had to the left of the altar an atelier, which is where William Raphael spent many years teaching the nuns and producing many of his own works. I was fascinated on the tour. There was a painting of Christ on both left and right of the altar, about 12 feet high. And then as I entered the atelier, I discovered 100 of his paintings, 50 of which were fantastic habitants and really important paintings. I asked the Mother Superior at the time, was there any chance that they would sell them? She said no. I said, any chance you'd sell it and I would create reproductions for you of whatever we took? She said no. I proceeded to be persistent for the next 25 years. It paid off. She was, I'm sure at the time, probably early 60s. But the story continued because each year, and very gently, I just asked them if they'd had a change of heart. And I had a family holding office that I created 8 years ago, and I told my CEO at the time, you have to take over from me and follow up, even if I pass, to keep trying to pick up this collection if you can. 3 years ago, he walked into my office with a smile from ear to ear and said to me, John, you're never going to believe this. And I said, what? He said, they've agreed. I said, who's agreed? He said, the sisters have agreed that the best person to be the custodian of this art is you, and they want it in the right hands. They gave me half the collection, all but one painting, which the other 50 went to the Lachine Museum. There was only one of those 50 that I really cared about. It was a butter churn and a habitant style, but the other 50 came to our place. It was sold to me for $1. And I couldn't accept that, took the nuns to lunch and made them a nice donation to thank them, because it was such an incredible act, and it increased the then size of the collection by over a third at that time. So today we're sitting with 165, and if any of you are thieves and I catch you on my balcony, you're in trouble. It has meant a great deal to me to see the book be realized, and by such professionals, and to have friends like Clarence and Jonathan and Pierre-Olivier here today to explain to you his background and his history. I hope you'll read the book. It's magnificently produced, and I couldn't have asked for a better result. Thank you.